Greetings, everyone. The speed of the Russian advance has decreased fivefold, and Russia has lost everything. Attacked in March. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is witnessing a terrifying turning point that no observer could have predicted. The spring of 2026, which the Kremlin had hoped would be a triumphant conclusion to the campaign, has unexpectedly turned into a record loss of life and the collapse of outdated tactics. In just a short month, the situation on the Ukrainian battlefield has changed dramatically with consecutive triumphs. Vast stretches of land are gradually returning to their former owners, as the Ukrainian army not only reclaimed territory, but also crushed Russian forces with overwhelming power. This is not a matter of random luck, but the result of a transformation process that turned Ukraine into a formidable war machine, skillfully combining innovative thinking and masterful tactics. The fierce attacks in key areas completely paralyzed the Russian advance. All the actual developments were revealed in detail by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, Mr. Oleksandr Syrsky, in an important announcement on April 15. He emphasized that although the Russian side had increased the intensity of their attacks as part of the spring offensive, Ukraine had given strong responses. With a determined statement about maintaining strategic initiative through an active defense, Syrsky brought some unwelcome news to Putin. It was thanks to this strategy. In March alone, the Ukrainian army regained control of nearly 50 square kilometers of territory that had previously been occupied by the enemy. These advances resulted from sharp counterattacks that put the Russian army entirely on the defensive. Ukraine was very wise to focus on reclaiming areas that Russia had only loosely controlled through infiltration tactics. Putin's gamble seems to be completely backfiring. He once thought he could exploit his numbers by sending soldiers into empty areas, turning them into dangerous gray zones. But in reality, Putin has been proven wrong. Ukraine has come back with explosive strength, reclaiming every inch of land even as Russia tries to apply maximum pressure in the spring campaign. Things might have been less bad for Moscow if these losses had happened after they had made significant advances for months. But the truth is even harsher than that. The 50 square kilometers that have just been liberated are only the tip of the iceberg. This comes after a month in which Ukraine has accomplished even more extraordinary things. But looking back on this dramatic campaign of counteroffensives in the south, as of February 20, Ukraine had regained about 300 square kilometers of territory. By the end of March, the number reported by Commander-in-Chief Xi Jinping had reached about 480 square kilometers. At first, these numbers may make it seem like a difficult counteroffensive. But in reality, that was an extremely profound strategic calculation, focusing on the weakest links in the entire Russian defensive line. The key point here is Ukraine's ability to maintain continuous offensive momentum for many months, leaving Putin's army unable to react in time. Not only did they lose territory, but this past March also saw an unimaginably high casualty rate for the Russian side. According to reports from Al Jazeera, the Russian army suffered a record number of casualties in a single month since the conflict began. The Ukrainian side claims that ramping up production and deploying drones created this bloody turning point. However, the reality is more complicated than that. The raw statistics speak for themselves. 35,351 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded in just 1 month, right when Ukraine reclaimed 50 kilometers of territory. This casualty rate increased by 29% compared to February. It's evidence that a pivotal change is taking place in Ukraine. Now they are no longer just holding the line, but are actively pushing back the enemy with a deadly active defense. Putin's worries are mounting as Russia's recruitment rate can't keep up with the pace of force depletion expected in 2026. With the goal of recruiting 409,000 troops from now until the end of the year, the Kremlin seems to be facing an impossible task. Currently, on average, Russia is only recruiting 1,120 troops per day. According to Al Jazeera's analysis, this will lead to a shortage of about 65,000 soldiers compared to the target set for the end of 2026. The inevitable consequence is that the number of troops rotating to the front lines is decreasing. And when the number of troops defending the occupied territories becomes thin, that's the golden opportunity for Ukraine to launch its next counterattacks. What we witnessed in March was already very impressive. But that may just be the prelude to an even bigger shock as Russia's manpower crisis worsens in the next phase of 2026. Struggling with recruitment issues, suffering record casualties, and losing territory at the same time. Can Putin's situation get any worse? The short answer is yes. This setback is happening right as Russia is launching its much-publicized spring offensive, aiming to completely overrun the entire Donbass and seize huge swaths of Ukrainian territory. Fierce attacks have erupted along the entire front line, with Russia throwing wave after wave of troops toward Kostyantynivka, Lyman, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, and the ring of fortress cities in Donetsk. They are still sticking to the only tactic Putin knows, using waves of soldiers as cannon fodder to crush the defenses until Ukraine collapses. Fierce fighting has also been reported around Oleksandrivka and Pokrov. Russia has claimed control of these areas since December last year. According to common logic, increasing the intensity of attacks should have helped Russia capture more territory. But in reality, the situation is turning out to be a slap in the face for the strategists in Moscow. What we're seeing across the entire front is a significant slowdown in the pace of Russia's advance. Bennett Insider has pointed out a bitter contrast. In March 2025, Putin's forces were advancing at a rate of about 12.9 square kilometers per day. But just a year later, that number dropped to only 2.58 square kilometers per day. In other words, Russia's advance has slowed fivefold in just 1 year. To rub salt into the wound, Ukraine has seized the initiative and managed to reclaim territory at a rate of 4.66 square kilometers per day, nearly twice as much as what Russia achieved. The meaning of all this for Russia is very simple. The spring offensive has completely failed. According to Frank, 24 assessments from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, have put the final nail in the coffin for Russia's March 2026 campaign. When weighing Ukraine's progress against Russia, March is the first month in 2.5 years where Russia's gains amount to nothing, while Ukraine is dramatically surpassing Russia. They are humiliating Putin by launching a much more effective offensive than their opponent, right in the very month that marks the start of Russia's victory parade. This is not only a personal humiliation for Putin, but a comprehensive disaster that proves the strategy of using manpower to crush problems is completely outdated on the 21st century battlefield that Ukraine has created. We are witnessing a shift in the focus of the war in favor of Kiev, and the secret behind these victories against a Russian army that vastly outnumbers them is drone technology. However, saying drones are everything isn't enough, since Ukraine is using advanced military strategy behind them. Please recall the numbers regarding Russian casualties in March that we mentioned. 35,351 soldiers taken out of action is an extremely high price to pay. According to data from Euromaidan Press, a shocking truth has been revealed. Up to 96% of those casualties were caused by various types of unmanned aerial vehicles. Ukraine's fleets of aerial and ground-based drone robots are unleashing their fury on Russia's spring offensive, creating a steel shield that helps Ukraine hold on to key areas that Putin is desperately craving. At the same time, they are paving the way for counteroffensive advances on other fronts. Ukraine's technological advantage in drones doesn't stop there. It is becoming increasingly overwhelming. Moving into 2026, the United Kingdom has pledged to deliver a massive aid package with more than 120,000 drones, along with millions of other devices that Ukraine's defense industry is rapidly producing on its own. The long-range war, which was once where Russia held an absolute advantage by using large numbers of drones to devastate Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure. But now the balance of power has completely shifted. This past March marked a historic turning point in this long-range battle of wits. According to a report from ABC News, this was the first month since the fighting began that Ukraine launched significantly more long-range drones into Russian territory than what Moscow could retaliate with. The difference is truly significant. 7,347 drones bearing Ukraine's mark faced off against 6,462 from the Russian side. Even more tragic for Putin is Ukraine's new generation of interceptor drones. They are capable of shooting down Shahed drones at a very low cost. Raising the interception rate to nearly 90%. Russia is not only launching fewer drones, but their effectiveness has also been the worst in many months. Putin's failures extend beyond the battlefield. Ukraine's strategy of striking deep into enemy territory is gradually eroding Russia's war machine from within. On Russian territory alone, 76 important targets have been attacked, including 15 key oil refineries. Ukraine's objective is very clear. They plan to weaken military power by destroying production sites and cutting off fuel, vital for armored units, while also targeting Russia's energy export income. Iran has truly worked wonders, but that's just one piece of the overall strategic picture that Ukraine is implementing. Behind those waves of brawn lies a determined military mindset. In Commander-in-Chief Serkai's statements, the phrase active defense carries a much deeper meaning than what we usually understand. Ukraine is using the quality of its operations to confront Russia's overwhelming numbers, forcing the opponent to follow the strategy it sets and continuously thwarting the Kremlin's attack plans. Along with that, Defense Minister Mikhail Fedorov has also carried out a drastic reform of the system. Since the beginning of 2026, he has set a goal to push Russia's irrecoverable losses to 50,000 people per month, a number enough to shake any army. This initiative does not mean that Ukraine will throw its troops into a counteroffensive spread across the entire 1,020-kilometer border. Instead, they are adopting a more sophisticated tactic, counterattacking in key areas. Expert George Barrow from the Institute for the Study of War affirms that this is not a coincidence. Ukraine has learned hard lessons from the 2023 counteroffensive, where their forces were stretched too thin, leading to less than expected results. Now, they are not repeating that mistake, but are focusing on striking where Russia is showing vulnerabilities after deploying infiltration tactics throughout 2025.
125.
Ukraine's current tactic is to attack the opponent's weakest points, while still maintaining a solid defensive line in areas where Russia is concentrating all its forces to occupy. This approach not only causes heavy casualties, but also forces Putin to move his troops reactively, creating new gaps for Ukraine to exploit. Oleksandrivka and Dnipropetrovsk are prime examples of this shift. Even before news of the 2026 counteroffensive broke out, Ukraine had already shown the first signs in Kupiansk, in the Kharkiv region. They crushed Russia's plans for occupation here, turning the Kremlin's victory claims into clumsy lies. Kyiv is pursuing a highly pragmatic strategy, willing to give up areas with little strategic value in order to focus all its efforts on reclaiming key positions that could break Russia's long-term plans. In Kupiansk, they completely destroyed Russia's attempt to showcase its strength ahead of peace negotiations. In Oleksandrivka and Dnipropetrovsk, they are stopping Russia from creating a defensive zone to protect its forces in Donetsk and pushing back the advance in Zaporizhia. This is evidence of remarkable maturity in operational planning as Ukraine becomes increasingly skilled at anticipating the enemy's intentions. In addition, Ukraine's strength is further enhanced by the Delta system, a modern cloud-based battlefield management platform. This system allows commanders to review real-time data from drones and reconnaissance units, providing precise intelligence down to the second to support planning. This transformation also comes from changing the command structure to a core system, which improves coordination between units. All these factors are coming together, creating a new strength on the battlefield, where Ukraine is not only focusing on defense, but is also launching powerful mid-range strikes. In contested areas like Donetsk, Russian military targets are now facing more frequent and precise attacks than ever before. Ukraine has quietly introduced a new generation of drones into the game, with a range far beyond traditional FPV models, but at a much lower cost than previous long-range drones. This is part of a campaign to target aggressively deployed Russian air defense systems. Data from Zerky Independent shows that between June 2025 and March 2026, as many as 492 attacks were carried out directly targeting the enemy's air defense shield. It is these initial strikes that have paved the way for the medium-range raids we are witnessing. Ukraine is not only attacking the front lines, they are breaking Russia's logistical backbone by destroying ammunition depots, remote drone gathering points, command centers, and major troop concentrations. When the air defense systems protecting the rear are nearly neutralized, safe air corridors are created, allowing Ukraine to freely bomb and choke off supply lines. This puts Russian frontline units in a desperate position, forcing them to fight without essential resources. This is a complex strategy that requires extremely coordinated efforts. Ukraine is weakening Russia from within to create explosive counterattack opportunities like in the first 2 months of the year. It should be understood that these counterattacks are not aimed at ending the war immediately, but rather at realizing the active defense philosophy that Serkaya has always pursued. By reclaiming strategic positions, Ukraine is creating a superior defensive advantage for other areas. Let's look at the situation in Donetsk. When Ukraine liberates the southern territories that Russia intended to use as a buffer zone, they can free up forces to move north. If Russia wants to stop the advance, they must move troops from Donetsk to reinforce the south. No matter which option Russia chooses, their offensive power in Donetsk will be broken because Ukraine has taken the initiative in a completely different part of the battlefield. While Russia is still struggling to find ways to deal with Ukraine's open tactics, Ukraine suddenly pulls out some unexpected trump cards. The Kapot newspaper revealed that the Ukrainian army is making full use of the underground tunnel network to move troops and military equipment. These networks, originally built in deadly zones to serve ambushes, have grown large enough to become underground supply lifelines that Russian radars or satellites cannot detect. Speed and innovation have once again become sharp weapons that help Ukraine outpace the enemy's sluggishness. Ukraine's strength comes not only from its weapons, but also from the maturity of a modern military system. The Center for Strategic and International Studies reports that Ukraine has integrated research and development directly into combat units. They developed a rigorous training system for air defense operators, turning technological advantages into real setbacks for the Russian military. As Sikai affirmed, the Ukrainian military never stands still. Every month, they conduct rigorous combat assessments to refine tactics and optimize coordination between command levels. Ukraine is always looking for ways to improve, while Russia remains stuck with attritional combat thinking from decades ago. Even though Russia uses drones, they are basically operating a 2022-style war machine in 2026. That's why Moscow's strategy is gradually falling apart. When we talk about Ukraine reclaiming those 50 kilometers of territory, it's not just a number on the map. The real significance is that Ukraine has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and maturity. Putin's invasion, no matter how brutal, has inadvertently shaped Ukraine into one of the world's leading military powers. Counterattacks are being launched with the tremendous power Ukraine now possesses, seizing the battlefield momentum, reclaiming territory, and destroying enemy forces in record numbers. The spring of 2026, which the Kremlin had hoped would be the decisive blow to secure victory, but it now seems like the beginning of the end for the invasion. This is no longer just Ukraine's subjective assessment. Even within Russia, warning bells about a dire situation on the battlefield have begun to ring. Meanwhile, Putin seems increasingly detached from the harsh reality unfolding. In your opinion, can Russia turn the tide as its manpower and logistics are being depleted at a staggering rate? In the era of 4.0 warfare, do soldiers still have a place? Or is new drone technology truly the factor that will decide the fate of great powers?